The Cecil Hotel. This 19-story hotel opened its doors in 1924 during the Roaring Twenties, a time of rapid growth and prosperity in Los Angeles. The Cecil's dark history began almost immediately after it opened. The Great Depression hit shortly after, and the area around the hotel, originally intended to cater to wealthy tourists, soon became part of the infamous Skid Row. As the neighborhood deteriorated, so did the hotel's clientele, and by the 1930s, it had become a haven for the destitute, the desperate, and the disturbed. One of the earliest recorded deaths at the Cecil occurred in 1931, when a guest named W.K. Norton was found dead in his room after ingesting poison capsules. This was just the beginning of a series of unalivings that would plague the hotel for decades. In 1934, Army Sergeant Lewis D. Borden slashed his own throat with a razor in his room. In 1937, Grace E. Magro fell from a 9th-story window, her body becoming entangled in telephone wires as she plummeted to the ground. The deaths continued with alarming regularity, with guests jumping from windows or ingesting poison, as if the Cecil itself exerted a deadly influence on those who stayed there. The Cecil's legacy of horror doesn't end with these deaths. Over the years, the hotel has also been linked to some of the most notorious criminals in American history. Perhaps the most infamous of these was Richard Ramirez, also known as the Night Stalker. Ramirez terrorized Los Angeles in the mid-1980s, committing a string of brutal murders, sexual assaults, and home invasions. During his killing spree, Ramirez reportedly stayed at the Cecil, using it as a base of operations. He would later call this hotel his home. It is said that he would return to the hotel after his crimes, discarding his bloody clothes in the hotel's dumpster and walking through the lobby in nothing but his underwear, unnoticed by the residents of Skid Row. Another serial killer associated with the Cecil is Jack Unterweger, an Austrian journalist who was secretly a sadistic murderer. Unterweger came to Los Angeles in 1991, ostensibly to report on crime in the city, but instead he used his time there to kill at least 3 women. Like Ramirez, Unterweger made the Cecil his temporary home, continuing the hotel's dark tradition as a refuge for the wicked. With so much death within its walls, it's no surprise that the Cecil is believed to be haunted. One of the most famous spirits said to haunt the hotel is that of the Black Dahlia, Elizabeth Short, a young woman who was brutally murdered in 1947. Her body was found mutilated and severed in a vacant lot not far from the hotel. While there is no concrete evidence linking Short to the Cecil, many believe she may have stayed there shortly before her death, and her spirit is said to roam the hotel to this day. The hotel's paranormal reputation only grew in the years that followed, particularly after the tragic death of Elisa Lam in 2013. Lam, a 21-year-old Canadian student, was staying at the Cecil when she mysteriously disappeared. After weeks of searching, her body was discovered in one of the hotel's water tanks, following complaints from guests about low water pressure and a strange taste in the water. The discovery was gruesome enough, but what made it truly disturbing was the bizarre elevator footage captured shortly before her death. In the video, Lam is seen acting erratically, pressing multiple elevator buttons, stepping in and out of the elevator, and appearing to hide from an unseen presence. The footage quickly went viral, sparking countless theories about what really happened to her. Was it a tragic accident? A case of mental illness? Or something more sinister? To this day, Lam's death remains unsolved, adding another layer of mystery to the Cecil's dark history. In recent years, the Cecil has undergone several changes in an attempt to shed its notorious reputation. In 2011, part of the hotel was rebranded as Stay on Main, a boutique hotel targeting budget-conscious travelers. However, this did little to erase the stigma attached to the Cecil's name, especially after the death of Elisa Lam. Bran Castle. Nestled deep within the rugged mountains of Romania, Bran Castle is a fortress that has stood the test of time. It is often referred to as Dracula's Castle, a title that has cemented its place in popular culture as one of the most eerie and mysterious locations in the world. But Bran Castle is not just a fictional backdrop for a vampire's tale. It is a place steeped in real history, dark legends, and unsettling mysteries. What makes Bran Castle truly disturbing is its association with Vlad the Impaler, the notorious 15th century ruler of Wallachia, whose gruesome methods of punishment earned him the nickname Vlad Dracula. It is a common misconception that Vlad inspired the character Dracula. His barbaric acts only inspired the author to use his name in the novel. The rest of Dracula is inspired by Western vampire legends, although there is little historical evidence to suggest that Vlad ever resided in Bran Castle. The connection between the castle and the vampire legend is strong, primarily due to Bram Stoker's 1897 novel, Dracula. But let's leave the fiction aside and focus on the real, chilling history of this place. Bran Castle has been the site of numerous battles, sieges, and executions over the centuries. Its walls have seen untold horrors, and the screams of the condemned seem to echo through its cold, stone corridors even to this day. The castle's dungeons, in particular, are said to be haunted by the tortured souls of prisoners who met their grisly end in the most brutal ways imaginable. Visitors to the castle often report an overwhelming sense of dread and unease as they descend into these dark, suffocating chambers. One of the most unsettling aspects of Bran Castle is its link to a lesser-known but equally terrifying legend, the Strigoi. The Strigoi are Romanian spirits that rise from the grave, much like vampires, to torment the living. Unlike the refined, aristocratic image of Dracula, Strigoi are restless, malevolent entities driven by a primal need for revenge. These spirits are said to roam the forests and mountains surrounding Bran Castle, preying on those who dare to venture too close after dark. In recent years, the castle has embraced its dark legacy, hosting events and tours that delve into its haunted history. And as you walk through Bran Castle, with its labyrinthine passageways and ominous towers, it's hard not to feel that you are being watched, that the shadows hold secrets too dark to reveal. Bermeja. In the vast azure waters of the Gulf of Mexico, just off the northern coast of the Yucatan Peninsula, lies, or perhaps once lay, an island so enigmatic its very existence is now questioned by scientists, historians, and conspiracy theorists alike. Bermeja first appeared on maps in the early 16th century, documented by Spanish explorers navigating the perilous waters of the Gulf of Mexico. The island was consistently marked on maps for over 400 years, described as a small, uninhabited landmass located roughly 100 miles off the Yucatan coast. For centuries, Bermeja was a fixed point, a reliable landmark in an otherwise unpredictable sea. However, as the world entered the modern era and more accurate surveying techniques were developed, something strange began to happen. Bermeja started to disappear from maps. By the late 20th century, Bermeja had vanished entirely from cartographic records. No one could find it, not even with the advanced technology of sonar mapping and satellite imagery. In 1997, a Mexican government-sponsored expedition was launched to locate Bermeja, but after exhaustive searches, the island was declared lost. The official explanation? It simply never existed. But how could an island that appeared on countless maps for centuries be nothing more than a myth? This is where the story of Bermeja takes a darker, more disturbing turn. One of the most compelling theories about Bermeja's disappearance centers around a potential geopolitical conspiracy. You see, Bermeja was not just any island. It was situated in an area rich in oil reserves. The Gulf of Mexico is home to some of the most lucrative oil fields in the world, and under international law, the presence of Bermeja would extend Mexico's territorial waters, granting them rights to these vast underwater resources. Some believe that Bermeja's disappearance was no accident, but rather a deliberate act by foreign powers, possibly the United States, to alter the maritime boundaries in their favor. The theory goes that Bermeja was destroyed or submerged to prevent Mexico from claiming the oil-rich waters. While this may sound like the plot of a spy thriller, it's worth noting that in the 1970s, Mexico and the US signed the Treaty of the Sea, a controversial agreement delineating their maritime boundaries and the exploitation of resources. The absence of Bermeja certainly benefited one party more than the other. But if Bermeja was indeed destroyed, how was it done? The most radical theories suggest that the island was bombed, obliterated by a military operation that erased it from existence. Others propose that a secretive government project involving seismic or nuclear testing might have caused the island to sink beneath the waves. These theories are, of course, unproven and lack solid evidence, but the mysterious circumstances surrounding Bermeja's disappearance continue to fuel speculation. While the geopolitical theories are fascinating, others argue that Bermeja's story is one of cartographic error rather than conspiracy. Some researchers believe that early explorers simply made a mistake when mapping the Gulf of Mexico. Back in the 16th century, navigation was far from an exact science, and the tools available were rudimentary at best. It's possible that what was marked as Bermeja was in fact a misidentified part of the mainland, a coral reef, or even a mirage, an optical illusion created by the intense heat and light reflecting off the water. Supporters of this theory point out that Bermeja's coordinates varied slightly on different maps, suggesting that the island's existence was more legend than reality. In this interpretation, Bermeja is a phantom island, a myth born out of navigational errors perpetuated by centuries of mistaken belief. Yet, even if Bermeja was nothing more than a figment of the imagination, why did it persist on maps for so long? Well, there is actually another explanation for this. In the past, it was a common strategy to fake your maps, or to fill them with false information, at least. That way, if an enemy or foreign country would find one of your maps, they would gather false information. Sometimes this was even done on purpose to spread false information. So Bermeja could be part of these fake maps, just a ploy to manipulate a foreign country's naval information. Today, Bermeja remains an unsolved mystery, a ghost island that haunts the imaginations of those who hear its tale. Despite numerous searches, no trace of the island has ever been found, and it's unlikely that it ever will be. Amityville Horror House. This seemingly ordinary Dutch colonial house has become one of the most infamous haunted locations in American history. The story of the Amityville Horror House begins on the night of November 13th, 1974, when 23-year-old Ronald DeFeo Jr. committed a heinous act that would forever stain the house with its dark legacy. In a chilling spree, Ronald took a high-powered rifle and murdered his entire family, his parents and 4 siblings, as they slept. The gruesome nature of the murders shocked the nation, and Ronald's subsequent trial revealed that he claimed to have heard voices urging him to kill, leading many to believe that the house itself harbored some malevolent force. Just over a year after the murders, in December 1975, George and Kathy Lutz, along with their 3 children, moved into the house, hoping to start anew. They purchased the house at a significantly reduced price due to its grisly history, but they were determined to make it their home. What was supposed to be a fresh start quickly descended into a nightmare. The Lutz family's experiences during their short 28-day stay in the Amityville house would go on to inspire a best-selling book, a series of movies, and countless debates over the validity of their story. According to the Lutzes, from the moment they moved in, the house began to reveal its sinister nature. They reported a series of increasingly disturbing paranormal events. The first signs were relatively minor. Doors and windows would open and close on their own. Strange cold spots would appear throughout the house, and foul odors would permeate certain rooms without any discernible source. However, the phenomena quickly escalated. George Lutz, who had no prior history of mental illness, began to exhibit strange behavior. He became obsessed with keeping the fireplace burning at all times, complaining of an intense cold that seemed to follow him throughout the house. His personality began to change, becoming increasingly irritable and distant, as if the house was slowly consuming him. Kathy Lutz, too, was not spared from the house's malevolent grip. She claimed to have been physically assaulted by an unseen force, describing how she was levitated off her bed and thrown against the wall. Her young children also reported terrifying encounters, including seeing shadowy figures and having their beds violently shaken in the middle of the night. One of the most chilling accounts came from their daughter, Missy, who claimed to have made an imaginary friend named Jody, a demonic pig-like creature with glowing red eyes that would stare at her from the windows. Perhaps the most terrifying event occurred in the basement, where George Lutz discovered a small hidden room behind a shelf. The room, painted entirely red, had never been mentioned in the house's blueprints, and the Lutzes claimed that their dog refused to go near it, barking and growling whenever it approached. This red room, as it came to be known, was believed by some to be the epicenter of the house's dark energy, possibly used for occult rituals by previous inhabitants, or the site of some ancient evil that predated the house itself. As the paranormal activity grew more intense, the Lutzes became increasingly desperate. They contacted a priest to bless the house, but according to their account, as the priest attempted to perform the blessing, he was driven out by an unseen force, commanding him to get out. The priest later claimed to have experienced stigmata-like symptoms, with blisters appearing on his hands, and he refused to ever set foot in the house again. After just 28 days, the Lutz family fled the house in the middle of the night. They claimed that they could no longer endure the relentless terror that the house inflicted upon them. Their story was later documented in Jay Anson's 1977 book, The Amityville Horror, which became a cultural sensation and sparked a series of films, starting with the 1979 movie of the same name. But as the story of the Amityville Horror spread, so did skepticism. Critics pointed out inconsistencies in the Lutzes' accounts. and some suggested that the entire story was a hoax, concocted to capitalize on the notoriety of the DeFeo murders. The lawyer for Ronald DeFeo Jr. even claimed that he and the Lutzes had fabricated the haunting over a few bottles of wine as a way to make money. Furthermore, subsequent owners of the house have reported no paranormal activity, leading many to question whether the haunting was real or simply a case of mass hysteria and the power of suggestion. Dragon Lodge. The Dragon Lodge, once a symbol of wealth and power, is now a decaying relic shrouded in mystery and dark legends. The mansion, perched on Victoria Peak in Hong Kong, was built in the 1920s and was once one of the most luxurious estates in the area. The story of Dragon Lodge begins like any other grand estate of its time. It was built by a wealthy Chinese businessman who intended to make it his family's home. The mansion featured expansive gardens, intricate stonework, and an impressive entrance that showcased its owner's status. But soon after construction was completed, strange things began to happen, and it wasn't long before the mansion's reputation began to turn dark. One of the most persistent legends associated with Dragon Lodge is that of the 7 nuns who were allegedly murdered on the property during World War II. According to local law, the mansion was occupied by Japanese soldiers during the war, and it was during this time that the nuns who were taking refuge in the area were captured and brutally killed in the mansion's gardens. Some versions of the story suggest that the nuns were beheaded, and their spirits are said to haunt the grounds to this day. Visitors to the site have reported seeing ghostly apparitions of women dressed in old-fashioned clothing, wandering the gardens or standing silently near the entrance, as if waiting for something or someone. The mansion's disturbing history doesn't end there. In the decades that followed the war, the Dragon Lodge passed through several owners, but none seemed able to stay for long. One of the more infamous stories involves a businessman who bought the mansion in the 1960s with the intention of restoring it to its former glory. However, his dreams of living in luxury were short-lived. Shortly after moving in, he began experiencing terrifying nightmares and hearing disembodied voices echoing through the empty halls. The final straw came one night when he claimed to have seen the ghostly figure of a woman standing at the foot of his bed, her eyes filled with sorrow. He fled the mansion that very night and never returned. But perhaps the most terrifying story associated with Dragon Lodge is that of the demon child. According to legend, one of the mansion's owners in the 1970s was a man who dabbled in the occult. He was said to have conducted dark rituals in the mansion's basement, attempting to summon otherworldly entities. The story goes that during one of these rituals, something went horribly wrong, and a malevolent spirit was unleashed. This spirit is said to have taken the form of a child, but with a twisted and demonic appearance, sharp teeth, glowing eyes, and an unnatural, malevolent presence. The demon child, as it came to be known, was said to have terrorized the mansion's occupants, causing objects to move on their own, lights to flicker, and an overwhelming sense of fear and despair to hang over the house. In recent years, there have been several attempts to demolish the Dragon Lodge and develop the land into something new. However, each time the project has been delayed or mysteriously halted. Some believe that the spirits of the mansion, particularly the vengeful nuns and the demon child, are protecting the site, preventing anyone from disturbing their final resting place. Others think that the mansion itself is cursed, and that anyone who tries to tear it down will suffer the consequences. So, if you ever find yourself in Hong Kong and feel a chill in the air as you walk near Victoria Peak, you might just be close to Dragon Lodge.